Pesahim, Daf 84. We're going to see two different Mishnayot today. The first one says as follows: Kol hane'echal bashor hagadol ya'achel bagedi harach v'rashech enafayim v'hasehuchim. Okay, we have a general principle that only edible parts of a sheep are that which one needs to eat for Korban Pesach. Also, you have to make sure that there is a kezayit of meat, of edible meat, for everyone who is joining into the group. So now, what do you define as something edible or not edible? The question here is regarding a baby goat. Baby goat is very soft. Even its bones are kind of cartilage, and they actually are edible when it's a baby. It's just that when it grows up, they will harden and then will not be edible. So the question is, do we define it by currently what's actually edible now, or based on what they will become? So the Mishnah says that anything that is edible in a large ox, obviously an ox cannot be used for Korban Pesach, but we're using that as the biggest, strongest animal whose bones are very hard. If in such an animal that limb or bone or whatever part will end up being edible, then it's also considered edible in the goat. The implication is the opposite, that if it's a part of the ox that will not be edible when it's an adult, so also in this young goat it is not edible. Then the Mishnah gives a couple of examples of the ends of ribs and the cartilage. These examples are not clear. Are these examples of things that are permitted or things that are not permitted? It looks like the Mishnah is missing something that to connect the general rule and these examples. All right, and that's what the Gemara will ask about. Rabbah Rameh. Rabbah raises a contradiction. Often that's between two different sources. In this case, it's between the beginning and end of the same Mishnah. We have a general rule that anything that is considered that is edible in a large ox was also going to be considered edible in a baby goat that is soft. So the implication is that whatever is not eaten in an adult ox, you may not consider food, and so you can't count that as a kezayit for the baby goat. Emasefa. So that's the general rule, but then let's see the examples. The ends of the ribs and the cartilage. Now these parts are not eaten in a large ox. But it sounds like it's saying that these are things that you can eat. So what's going on here? Rather, actually, there's a machloket. There's two opinions in the Mishnah. The first opinion is anything that would not be edible in the large ox would not be edible. So therefore, this cartilage is not edible in an ox, and is not edible. You cannot consider it food in the baby goat. However, but there's another opinion that says, no, you can include the ends of the ribs and the cartilage, seemingly because even though they're not edible as is in the adult ox, if you cook it a lot, it'll soften up. So potentially it could be edible in the large ox. So that's Rabbah's way of explaining the Mishnah. Rava, however, says no, it's all one opinion. Rava Amar Mahen Ketane. It's using here's an example format. V'hachi Ketane. Kol hanechad bashor hagadol bishlaka yachel begedi harach besali, is adding in a little bit of explanation. Anything that would be edible for an adult ox if you cook it, right? So he allows a little bit more leniency that soften up while cooking. That can be eaten for the young goat, for the baby goat, even though that's actually roasted, and roasting is not going to soften it up as much, but still edible because it's a baby. For example, the ends of the ribs and the cartilage, right? They would be edible. So really, Rava says everything is one opinion, which would be the same as the Yesh Omrim in Rabbah's reading. And we're going to prefer Rava. He's the student of Rabbah. Tanya Kivated Rava, because he has a baraita that supports him. Kol hanechal bashor Hagadol bishlaka yachel bagadi harach besali. The Braita says exactly the words that he adds in. Umahen. So that's all exactly what he said, right? If it can be boiled in the adult ox and become edible, then you can eat it when it's roasted in the baby goat. And for example, these parts, the end of the ribs and the cartilage. The Braita then adds another couple of things. Vegidin hadakin, one thing. Venidonin kabasad. Also, soft sinews are judged as meat. They're also considered edible. Okay, good. So that's the first. Go to the outline. That's the Mishnah and the first machloket between Rabbah and Rava, and we prefer Rava. The end of that Braita mentions sinews. So now we're going to talk more about that, and we see machloket between Rabbi Yohanan and Resh Lakish. Are they considered edible? Because right now, in their current condition, right, they are edible. But Resh Lakish says no. In the future, they're going to harden, and so we follow their future condition. We're going to see that Rabbi Yohanan actually changed his mind during his career and ended up agreeing with Resh Lakish. Itmar gidin shesofan lahakshot. Right, the baby it's a baby now and they're edible, but they will harden when it's an adult. Rabbi Yochanan amar nimnina lehen b'Pesach. They are considered food, and then you can add in, a couple of more people into your group because they can say, "Oh, we'll eat the kezayit," because we count those gidin in the volume of the edible meat. Resh Lakish amar en nimnina lehen b'Pesach. He says, "No, we do not." What's the essence of their controversy? Rabbi Yochanan amar nimnina lehen b'tarashta azlinan. Rabbi Yochanan says we follow the current condition, and right now it's edible. Resh Lakish amar en nimnina lehen b'tar basof azlenan. No, we do not count them because eventually they will become inedible, so we don't count them in. Iti be'Resh Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. Resh Lakish now will challenge Rabbi Yochanan's opinion that is saying that we follow the current condition. He's challenging from our very Mishnah, which says you can anything that is edible in an adult ox, all that is considered edible in a young goat. Like the ends of the ribs and the cartilage. So I brought a couple of examples of things that are like this and are okay, but gidin, no, that would not be included. And so, in other words, in this case, we follow what they're going to be, and they're not going to be edible when it's an adult ox, so they are not edible now. That's what the Mishnah said. Amale Tanna Hane V'Uadin Lehanach. No, the Mishnah mentioned a couple of things that are okay, and it didn't mention everything. It just gave a couple of examples. But the truth is, Rabbi Yochanan says, I think the Mishnah would include also these gidin. Hane mai ta'ama deha mitakeli b'shor hagadol bishlaka. Hanachname mitakeli b'shor hagadol bishlaka. What's the reason why the cartilage and the ends of the ribs are okay? Because even though they're not really edible as is, but if you boil them in an adult ox, then they become edible. So too the gidin, if you boil them, they become edible. So really that follows the Braita that we had above. So Rabbi Yochanan was able to resolve that question. Okay, now Amar another question that they're going to ask to Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Yirmiah, Rabbi Abin. Ki azalt lekamed Rabbi Abhu ramele. Says, listen, when you go to Rabbi Abhu, can you do me a favor and ask him this question? This is Rabbi Yirmiah asking the question through a messenger. By the way, Rabbi Yirmiah is known to ask out of the box questions that some people they bother some people, kind of very technical questions. Mi amar Rabbi Yochanan gidin shesofan lakshot nimnin alehen b'Pesach alma batar hashta azlinan. Did Rabbi Yochanan really say what he was quoted saying, that when regarding the sinews, since that are going to end up becoming hard later on, we still consider them food now because we go by the current state, right? That's how he was quoted. You quoted him, but did he really say that? Right? On another occasion, Resh Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan about another similar case. Or harosh shel aigel harach mahu she'it tameh. The skin on the head of a calf. so that when it's a baby calf, that skin is very soft and is edible. The question is, can it become tameh? In general, tameh as food, right? Food is more susceptible to tum'ah than other things. So if this is considered like regular hide of an animal that's not edible and does not become tameh like food, the question is this: because it's soft and is edible, are you going to consider it like food for the purposes of receiving tum'ah? And Rabbi Yohanan responded, "V'amar lo en mitameh, no, en mitameh, it does not become impure. In other words, he does not consider it food. Well, even though it's edible now because it's nice and soft, alma batar basof azlinan, he doesn't consider it food because eventually, when the calf grows up, that skin will harden into hide and will not be edible. So you see now that Rabbi Yohanan, according to this, the conversation, thinks that we follow the future condition, and that contradicts what he just said, that we follow the current condition. All right, so he went and asked the question to Rabbi Abu, and Rabbi Abu said, "Dir malach ha lachash likimche." Whoever rameh, whoever offered this contradiction, whoever asked this question, in other words, Rabbi Yirmiah, who sent him on this mission, he was not careful with his flour. This seems to be a metaphor. There were people that were professional that would carry around mills, and if you have flour, they would grind it for you. They didn't care if it was fine flour or coarse flour. They would just grind anything without thinking, without looking what they were grinding. So he says, whoever asks you this question is kind of like that. This is a person that just likes asking questions, but isn't actually looking into the content of the matter that they are asking. So this is a pretty mean insult to say, he's just producing random questions, but is not actually thinking about them. Okay, why is this a bad question? Yohanan actually changed his mind, right? And he what he said here in this conversation is what he truly believes, that we follow the end, what it's going to be. And the original thing he said up above about the Gidin, that we follow the current condition, that is not what he thinks anymore. And we know because when Resh Lakish challenged him on this, Rabbi Yohanan says, "Don't upset me, right? Don't bother me about this, because I was basing myself on a Mishnah that I thought that was majority opinion, and that Mishnah taught that you follow the current condition. But now I realize that Mishnah is a minority opinion, and so I rejected it. And now I came along and I changed my mind, and I agree with you that we follow the future condition." Okay, and therefore, you shouldn't have asked that question. Rabbi Yohanan changed his mind. All right, good. So that was Rabbi Yohanan Resh Lakish, and he changed his mind. And now we have the next Mishnah, which is going to be talking about notar and breaking bones. This law that you cannot break a bone, when does it apply? So it's two opinions. These are somewhat parallel to something we saw yesterday. Tanna Kamma says, only if it's a valid sacrifice, then you cannot break the bone. But if it's an invalid sacrifice, then it's okay to break the bones. The Danasi says a different formulation. Only if it's edible, then you can't break the bones. But if it's not edible, then you can't break the bones. So being edible is even more limited than being valid. So those are the B is more lenient. Now, what's the practical difference, right? When do you have a case of something that would be invalid, where there would be a difference when something is valid and yet not edible? So the Gemara is going to offer 8 different scenarios that would be a practical difference between Tanna Kamma and Rabbi, and we'll actually prove that 4 of them from an authoritative source. All right, so this is a fun exercise to figure out all these 8 different solutions. So here's the Mishnah. Hashobedet ha'esem ba'pesach tahor hadeze lokeh arba'im. If you have a korban pesach that is pure, in other words, it's a good, valid korban pesach, and someone breaks a bone, so they violated this lav and they get 40 lashes. Aval hamotir betahor v'hashover betameh eno lokeh arba'im. But someone who leaves notar, if it's a pure, good sacrifice, and he leaves over meat, then he does not get lashes. Also, if he breaks a bone in an animal that's tameh, he also does not receive lashes. So let's see why he does not receive lashes in these two cases. Bishlama motir betahor. Right, we understand the first law that everybody knows, the explicit pasuk. If you leave any meat left over, then the reason why motir, right, when you have notar, you have to burn it, but you don't get lashes. Why don't you get lashes even though you didn't eat it all and you left it over till the morning? Because we have a general rule that lav hanitak laseh. If you have something that says don't do this, but if you did it, here's a remedy. So that remedy is in place of lashes. You shouldn't get lashes because the Torah is offering you a remedy. So don't leave any meat left over till the morning. If you did, then burn it. So if you did, then burn it. So that means you don't get a punishment. And that's the general rule. And that applies here. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, explaining why hamotir betahor does not get lashes. Rabbi Yaakov gives another derivation. Rabbi Yaakov omer, lo min Hashem huzeh. No, I don't even need, that's too complicated. I have a simpler way. Ela mishum davan le'lav she'en bo ma'aseh. This is a lav that has no action, right? How do you violate this? You just sit around and do nothing, right? If you have the Korban Pesach there and you fall asleep and you do nothing and don't eat it, then you violate. So anything that is violated by being passive, you don't get lashes on. You only get lashes if you actually do something active, an action, in order to violate it. Okay, so this one is clear. But now the question is, how about shover betameh? Ela shover betameh min elan. How do you know that one is permitted to, not only are you not liable, but you actually are permitted to break a bone of a tameh animal, a tameh koban. Damar kera ve'asem lo tishberu bo. Bo is a limiting word. Bo bakasher velo bapasul. Bo means only if it's a valid, if it's kasher, then you cannot break the bone. But if it's invalid, disqualified, then you can. All right, good. Now we have the source. We're going to bring a baraita that gives two different formulations of this. Tanu Rabbanan. That's exactly what we said before. So Tanna Kamma says the difference is between kosher and pasul, valid and disqualified. Rabbi Omer, that's Rabbi Nasi, says bebayit echad ye'achel. The beginning of the pasuk says it should be eaten in one house, and then it continues on and says, so this law of not eating, not breaking it, has something to do with it being edible. If you can actually eat it, then, right, so it has to not only be kosher or valid, it also actually has to be edible, then you cannot break the bone. But if it cannot be eaten for whatever reason, then the law does not apply and you can break the bones. All right, these seem to be very similar, right? When would you have a difference between the two? My benaihu, Amar Rabbi Yirmiah, answer number one. Pesach haba betum'ah ika benaihu. Leman damar kasher hay pasul. Let's say most of the community is tameh, and you're allowed to bring the Korban Pesach when most of the community is tameh. So according to the one that says it needs to be valid, this is not valid. It's not kasher, right? I mean, it's disqualified in the sense that it's brought in the state of ritual impurity. And therefore the prohibition would not apply. But according to the one that says about it being edible, it is actually edible in the state. And therefore the breaking the bone does apply. So according to this, actually the B's opinion would be more stringent than the Tanna Kamma. So Rav Yosef doesn't like that. Rav Yosef Amar, no, in this kind of case, everyone would agree that the prohibition does not apply. The Rabbi was actually coming to be more lenient than Tanna Kamma, and in your interpretation, he's more stringent. And this offering is disqualified because it's called ritually impure. So even though you can eat it. So actually in this case, everyone would agree that the prohibition would not apply. So I'm going to bring a second example, a second scenario. That would be a difference between them. This is the scenario we actually saw on yesterday's daf. If it was once valid and then became pasul, became tameh, whatever. Leman amar kasher ha-kasherhu. So according to the Tanna Kamma, this is valid, and so it was valid, and so therefore the prohibition does apply. Leman damar ra'ui la'achila ha-hashtad lav ra'ui la'achilahu. According to the B, it's not edible now, even though it was once valid, but right now it's not edible. So therefore, prohibition does not apply. Third opinion, Abaye amar kule alma kol ki hay gavna en bo mishum shibirat asem. My tama hashtamiha ha pasul hu. Says no. In your case, everyone would agree. Even Tanna Kamma would agree that it does not. The prohibition does not apply. Each opinion, each scenario becomes more and more lenient, right? And says no. Well, everybody would agree that that's okay because even though it was valid before, right now it's not valid. It's not valid and it's not kosher. So everyone would agree that the prohibition does not apply. Rather, another answer, Ela Shibirat Ha'asim Be'od Yom Ika Benaihu. What we're talking about when on the 14th, when before it's edible, before you can eat it. So can you break the bone during the afternoon of the 14th? Laman damar kasher ha-kasherhu. According to the one who says, is it a valid korban? It is a valid korban on the 14th, and therefore you cannot break the bone. According to the Nasi, you cannot eat it before nightfall, so it's not edible. Since it's not edible, the prohibition does not apply, so you can break the bones. All right, that's Abaye. What are we up to? Abaye was number 3. Okay, Rav Papa now is going to say the limb is half outside. Metibe, before we get to that, we have a question. Metibe, the B omed, nimnin al moach shebarosh, ven nimnin al moach shebakulit. So you said, is it actually edible or not? We have a braita, according to which the Yudanasi says, you can count as food, right? And count as one of the kezayitim for people to join in to the marrow that's in the head, in other words, the brain. That's considered, that's edible. Lots of people eat brains. But the thigh bone, the marrow in the thigh bone, no, that is not considered part of not considered food. Why? Because the brain you can get out of the skull even without breaking the bone, the skull. You can pull it out the nose. Sorry. And if you think, which is what you said before, that you are allowed to break bones on the 14th, then why don't you include the marrow in the thigh bone? Why not just break it and take out that marrow, and then that you can add that to the volume for another kezayit, for another person to register. So, and this is the opinion of Rabbi, from the fact that Rabbi does not account the marrow in the thigh bone. Sounds like he thinks that one may not break the bone, not even on the 14th. That's a challenge to Abaye. Amalach Abaye, v'litamich mishech hashecha nameh naite gum marta v'nechot ale v'niklaha v'napeka lamoach dideh v'nimni ale. Says no. How about? Well, what would you answer? Abaye says to that very question, because there's a way to get it out even without breaking it, right? Even at nightfall, when for sure you can't break it open. You could bring a coal and put it on the bone and burn it, and you make a little hole, and then you can take it out of the hole, and then you can count that also. So why don't you say that? That should be allowed, because burning a hole is not actually considered breaking a bone. Also, cutting a sinew is not considered breaking a bone. So what's your answer to why you can't make a hole and take it out? Right? Abaye amar mishum peka. So rather, the reason is because by doing that, you might, when you're trying to make that hole and open it, you might break it open. It might burst open, and then you will violate breaking the bone. So just like you worry about that, so too, that's what I would be worried about. and that's why I do not permit that. Rav Amar Mishum have said Kodashim, the Kamafsid le Bayadayim, or another reason, because you are when you're burning it there at that location, you might be burning some of the actual food, and then you are ruining sacrificial food. Right? The fire might consume some of the marrow. Okay, so since even you agree that you can't do that at night, so I would say the same thing and make a gezerah the day before to that night, and that's why I would not permit taking out the marrow that's in the thigh bone. But I still agree that you can break bones on the 14th. All right, so that's opinion number 3. Rav Papa, number 4. Amar kol ki gavna kul amar yesh po mishum sheberat ayasem. No. In that case, also everyone would agree that you're allowed to break the bone. Sorry, yesh po mishum sheberat ayasem. In that case, you are not allowed to break the bone, right? Because at night it's going to be edible, so you can't break the bone on the 14th. Just because it's not edible right now, no, it's about to be edible. Nothing wrong with this korban. So he's actually he would be more machmir than that the previous opinion, Abaye's opinion. We're talking about a limb that half of the limb went outside the wall of Jerusalem and half of it's in. Right? Any part, you're not allowed to take the animal outside of Jerusalem. Any part that went out becomes invalid. Mandamar kasher. Ha-kasheru, the one who says kosher, well, the part that's in is kosher, so you can't break it. The one who says about edible, the part that went out is not edible, and therefore you're allowed to break it. All right, it's not clear what his answer is because both half is in as half is out. So which one are you focusing on? Why focus on one more than the other? And in any case, this the Rabbi's opinion here could follow. Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka says that when half of it went out, we do not apply the law of Shavirat Ayasem. All right, this answer is not so clear, but the Rishonim discussed that. Anyway, we have the next answer to Rav Sheshet Bered Rav Idi Amar. Kol ki gavna de kulama and bo mishum shebirat ayasem. No, in that case, if it's half out, then it's already invalid. The part that went out is invalid, so you can break it. Tahai ebed ha pasulhu ela shebirat ayasem bena ika benaihu. No, rather we're talking about the where that limb was not fully cooked. That's the case. Manda amar kasher hakasheru. It is valid, so therefore you cannot break it. But the one about edible, right now it's not edible because it's not cooked enough. So since it's not edible, you're allowed to break it. No, in that case, it would apply the prohibition because just cook it more and then it will be edible. So you can't call that not edible. All right, so everyone would agree that that's valid and it is edible. We're talking about the fat tailbone. Right, that was a delicacy there of the sheep, which is not eaten by people. That goes on the mizbeach. It is valid. It's a valid part of the korban. So therefore, you may not break that bone. But according to the B, this is not edible because it's brought on the mizbeach, so nobody can eat it. Therefore, you can break that bone. Okay, seventh answer. Rav Ashi amar kol ki gavna vaday and bo mishum shebirat ayasem. No, that kind of case, the tailbone, everyone would agree that there's no problem of breaking the bone. To have vaday and because it's not edible at all. Even Tanna Kamma would agree that it's so not edible that you can break that bone. We're talking about a limb that does not have even a kezayit basar on it. Talking about valid, it's valid, right? It's a valid section of the korban. According to the one that's edible, Edible means edible that has a kezayit. If it's less than a kezayit, that's not called even eating, active eating. So therefore, you can break the bone if it doesn't have a lot of meat on it. And finally, Ravina amar kol ki agavna let be mishum shebirat esem. No, that kind of case, everyone would agree that there's no there's no prohibition of breaking it because it's so little meat. Because you need there to be some meat on it. Ela ebe she'en alav kezayit basar b'makom zeh. You have a limb where one part of it has a lot of, like a drumstick maybe, right? One part has a lot of meat on it, but the other part has only a little meat on it. And you want to break it at the part that has only a little meat on it. Once it's valid, absolutely it's valid. It has not lots of meat on it, the whole limb, limb as a whole, so you cannot break it. But the one who says Rabbi, who says edible, it has to be edible at the point where you're going to break it. And here, on that part of the bone does not have a lot of meat on it, and so therefore there's nothing to eat there, so it's not edible, so you can break it. All right, that's the 8 different scenarios, and now we bring a baraita that is going to list a few of them, 4 of them, and so this will back up 4 of the answers. Tanya ke'arba'a minayhu de Tanya. Rabbi Omer, this is Rabbi, the second opinion. Bebayit echad yachel ve'esim lo tishberu bo. He brings again both halves of the pasuk. You have to eat it in one house and don't break the bone. Ala kasheru chayav ve'eno chayav ala pasul. Okay, this formulation is not really the same as what he said before. This is more of a general formulation, actually the same as Tanna Kamma. Which is valid, you cannot break, but it's okay to break that which is pasul. All right, even though he has formulation, since he did bring yachel, I guess we're going to interpret this the same way he did before. It has to be edible in order to violate breaking it. So if it was once valid, but now not valid anymore at the time that you're eating it, well, that's not edible. So you do not violate breaking the bone. That's what Rav Yosef said. If there is a shur achila, yesh bo shur achila, yesh bo mishum shebirat asem, and bo shur achila, and bo mishum shebirat asem. If it has enough to eat, a kezayit, then you violate. If it does not have a kezayit to meat on it, then you don't violate breaking the bone. That's what Rav Ashi said. Anything that you go on goes on the mizbeach, like the fat tail, right, is not shibirat does not apply to that. That was the opinion of Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak. Beshat achila yesh bo mishum shibirat asem, shelo beshat achila en bo shibirat asem. You only violate during the time of eating, not when it's not during the time of eating, like on the 14th. That was the opinion of Abaye. That's okay. That's it. So, then we go on to a new subject. So to summarize, we have these 8 different opinions, but the Baraita comes and supports 2, 3, 6, and 7. Well, I think that's enough for today. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.